Jackson Dart had an impressive preseason for the New York Giants, but did he do enough to edge out Jameis Winston in the QB2 battle? Locked on Giants starts right now.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Train, a credential member of the New York Giants media. For Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. And we thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And if you're making us your first listen of the day, we thank you for that as well. It is appreciated. All right, on today's Locked On Giants podcast episode, have the Giants reached a decision as to who QB2 is going to be? We're going to talk about that. The decision might not be as cut and dried as you would think it might be. So we'll talk about that to start things off. Then in segment 2, some of the roster cuts have begun to be made by the Giants. So far, no great surprises, but what are the burning needs that this team still needs to address? And I'm going to give you 3, one of which I don't think a whole lot of people are talking about. So we'll talk about that in segment 2. And then finally in segment 3, we're going to do a segment on draft scholarships. And by that, I mean, we're going to look at draft picks that because of their pedigree are probably going to make the roster, but they shouldn't. And we're going to talk about maybe, explore a little bit more into what the thinking might be if these guys make the roster. So that is what we're going to do on today's Locked On Giants podcast. Again, welcome on into everybody. All right, let's get things started here. So have the Giants named quarterback 2? Now, head coach Brian Daboll was asked that question today, and as usual, he wouldn't say, just like he wouldn't talk about any injuries or just yet. Now, let me backtrack a little bit. If you remember at the start of training camp, Brian Daboll was asked about the quarterback situation. And he said, Russell Wilson is our starter. Okay, no surprise there. Russell Wilson named the starter on day 1 of training camp. But Daboll left the door open at quarterback 2 between Jameis Winston and Jackson Dart, and at the time, Tommy DeVito. More so Winston and Dart being quarterback 2. So we go through this entire training camp and preseason. Dart looks pretty darn good. I think we can all agree that. So who now becomes quarterback 2? Folks, there's a few different ways this can go. I'm going to give you the first one. All right. The first one is there is no quarterback 2 in the true sense of the words. In other words, if something happened to Russell Wilson, there's no situation where, say, for example, Jameis Winston is locked in as quarterback 2. I think what's going to happen is they are going to keep the 3 quarterbacks, Wilson, Winston, and Dart. What is going to happen, though, is unlike, in the past when you had 3 quarterbacks, you would designate one as an emergency quarterback because it was another way to get an extra player on the roster if you needed it for injury purposes. I think wherever possible, the Giants are going to leave Dart active. They are not going to designate him as the emergency quarterback if they don't have to. And the reason for that is they want to maybe give themselves a little flexibility to where if, let's say, for example, Russell Wilson can't play, depending on what the circumstances are, they can either plug in Winston or Dart. So, for example, let's say Russell Wilson gets injured during the week, can't play in a game that's coming up on Sunday. And it's early in the season and the Giants are still in the hunt. In that case, you go with Winston as your starter and you move Dart up to number 2, if you will. Now, let's say it's in a game and Russell Wilson gets hurt in a game and the Giants are still in the game. In that case, again, maybe you go with Jameis Winston. You let him finish out the game because you're still competitive and you wait before you put Jackson Dart in there because Jackson Dart, you want to keep developing him. Now, let's say it's a blowout, one way or another. The Giants are up by 20 points or vice versa. Hopefully, it'll be the former. Now, maybe you have a scenario where you say, okay, Jackson, you go in, you mop up, you get some snaps because there's no substitute for game snaps, even though it would be in a mop up role. And presumably you would say, okay, well, it's probably, a situation where, he's going to hand the ball off. If they have a big enough lead, it might make sense to put him out there and let him try a few passes. And, especially if they have, if it's late in the game and there's no chance of the opponent catching up. So that could be a scenario in which, Jackson Dart becomes the number 2 quarterback. So it's really going to depend on the flow of the game and the circumstances. And that's why I think there isn't going to be a true number 2 quarterback. Now, you'll probably see a number 2 listed on the unofficial depth chart. But remember, that depth chart is not coming from the coaches. It is generated by the Giants PR staff based on practice reps and what they believe to be true. It does not reflect anything that Brian Dable or Mike Kafka or Shea Tierney told them. So just keep that in mind when you see the depth chart when it rolls out. Now, there is one other scenario I want to talk about. And this one, I think this is a long shot. I don't think this happens, but we've got to discuss it anyhow. There is a world where potentially Tommy DeVito moves into the quote unquote number 2 spot and Jameis Winston is traded. Now, you're probably saying, but Pat, didn't Brandon Brown say last week that Jameis Winston is going to be a Giant? Yeah, he said that. But what was he supposed to say? Was he supposed to come up and say, well, we'd like to keep Jameis Winston, but if we get an offer we can't refuse, we're going to move him? He wasn't going to say that because the minute he makes it known that he's available, now they're compromising the potential value that they can get for Jameis Winston in a trade. So Brandon Brown had to say that. So let's say a quarterback needy team, and I'm going to use the Raiders as an example. Let's say the Raiders come along because the Raiders just lost Aiden O'Connell, their backup, to a broken wrist. He's going to miss 6 to 8 weeks with a broken wrist. So the Raiders come along, they say, you know what, Giants? We're going to make you a sweetheart of an offer. We want Jameis Winston. Name your price. Well, if you're the Giants, you can obviously, ask for draft picks. But there's another thing you can ask for. You can ask for a player-to-player swap, right? So in the next segment, we're going to talk about needs that the Giants have. And you guys know what some of the needs are. But let's say the Raiders have an excess of players at a position that the Giants have identified as a top need. Maybe the Giants say, okay, you know what? We'll send you Jameis Winston. Or if you want Tommy DeVito instead, we'll send you Tommy DeVito if you send us player X at this position. All right. So there's that element to take into consideration. So the bottom line, folks, is this can go any way. That's probably why, Brian Dable didn't want to name a quarterback 2. It has nothing necessarily to do with who beat who for the job. It's just leaving your options open at this point in time as they finalize the roster and also as they continue to work to get Jackson Dart snaps. Because remember, as I've told you many times, once we get into the regular season, the quarterback snaps now, you have to get the bulk to the starter, Russell Wilson. The backup is going to get his share of snaps, okay? Probably the second most amount of snaps. And the third string quarterback, probably going to get a sprinkling of snaps if he's not running the scout team. So Dable wouldn't go into details as to how they're going to exactly distribute the snaps beyond Russell Wilson, but that's typically how it's done. And it just bears watching because Dable has kind of left the door open for a number of scenarios to happen at quarterback 2. And that's why I don't believe the Giants have a true quarterback 2 like they have had in previous years. All right, Giant fans, coming up next, we're going to talk about the burning needs. I have 3 that come to mind. What are they? Tell you right after this.
This episode is brought to you by Rougiette. I know that you've probably heard of Viagra and Cialis, maybe even tried them, but if you're looking for something that goes beyond the usual pill, then it's time to meet Rougiette Ready. Their 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue, kicks in fast, on average in about 15 minutes, while some of those usual pills can take up to hours, and the effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can always stay confident in control when the moment is right. And it's all completely online. You can read real customer reviews on their website, and over 150,000 men have already made the switch. Just head over to rougiette.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, and manufacturing review. Please visit the Rougiette website for full safety information.
Hey, Giant fans, August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champion before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. So go on and take a flyer on the Defensive Rookie of the Year award winner if you're feeling good about Giants outside linebacker Abdul Carter running away with the honors. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets right now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and we at Locked On have an important request for you. Locked On wants to hear from you. We've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcasts even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, and answer questions about our advertising. Go to lockedonpodcasts.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes a survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcasts.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. Thanks so much for helping us out. Okay, in this segment, Giant fans, we're going to talk about the burning needs of the New York Giants. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the program, the Giants have started to make some cuts. So far, no surprises there. And we're going to run down the cuts, by the way, once we get the final, 53, or the initial, I should say. I keep saying final, but it's initial 53-man roster. We'll talk about the surprises and all that stuff. But as I see it right now, as this roster is taking shape, there are 3 positions of need that I think are really standing out like sore thumbs. 2 of them are on the defensive side of the ball. All right. The first one, safety. Now, the Giants on Sunday, they let go of Kevon Wallace. They have 2 safeties in Dane Belton and Tyler Nubin who are nursing injuries. Safety has got to be up there. Right now, you could say, okay, well, maybe Makari Page makes it. Okay, possibly. I think he goes to practice squad. Well, what about Raheem Lane? Again, I think he might make it, but I don't think he's going to be the long-term answer there. All right. And it's also possible that if the Giants decide to keep 4 quarterbacks for a short period of time until they can work out a trade, maybe they sacrifice a spot at safety. All right. And fill that later. But here's the thing. The Giants are going to need safety depth. And ideally, whoever they bring in, whether it be a waiver wire pickup or a trade acquisition, that guy is going to have to contribute on special teams. Right now, the cuts are now just starting to come in around the league. I haven't had a chance to really look through them to say, okay, they should go to this guy or that guy. But safety, in my mind, the number one spot where the Giants need to add depth. The next spot where the Giants need to add some depth, and this might surprise you, slot cornerback. Now, Art Green can play slot cornerback. Nick Jones competed at slot cornerback. I think the Giants may want to look for an upgrade, though, because there was a drop-off when Drew Phillips was not on the field. And I do think the Giants are going to look for an upgrade at that spot because especially, look, depending on what they do with cornerbacks on the outside, if they want to even move, Drew Phillips around, they really don't have an option right now that can step in and not miss a beat. So I think slot cornerback is going to be another position that the Giants are going to be really invested in looking at on the waiver wire, if not, the trade market. So, for trade, actually, let me take that back. I think for that position, I don't know if I would trade away assets. I would look maybe for the waiver wire there. But, safety, like I said, is probably the higher priority given the injury situation with Belton and with Newman. And again, I don't know exactly what the injury situation is because Brian Dable has been tight-lipped. And, for those of you who asked me, why has he been so stingy about injury information? This could be why, right? So if he lets it out that a guy might potentially miss a week or 2 weeks or whatever, and now somebody comes along and says, hey, we'll trade you so-and-so, now the price goes up. So that could be the reason why Brian Dable is tight-lipped when it comes to injuries, especially in the preseason when he doesn't really have to disclose that information. Kind of makes sense if you think about it. All right, the next position that I think the Giants probably would like to address, wide receiver. Now, when you have Malik Neighbors on the field, the Giants have a really, really good-looking passing game. But when Malik is not on the field, you notice it, all right? It's hard not to see it. And this is no disrespect to Darius Slayton or Wan'Dale Robinson, but the Giants right now aren't set up where, like the Eagles, where the Eagles, you can make a case, have 3 deep at receiver, 3 guys who can maybe you can consider number 1 receivers. The Giants don't have that yet. And, spoiler alert, we're going to talk about Jalen Hyatt in the next segment, but the Giants, they could use another legitimate playmaker. Slayton can be that guy, and I think he'll get his chances. Wan'Dale Robinson, I don't know if he's going to purely be slot or what the story is for him, but the Giants, I think, could use another deep threat at receiver. I just don't think the receiver depth, despite all these guys, by the way, that they had in camp, I just don't know that they have the guy, moving forward. And some of you have asked, well, what about Gabe Davis, who is still out there? And I'll say this about Gabe Davis. Number one, is Gabe Davis at this point of his career, is he going to want to come to a team like the Giants who maybe aren't going to be a competitive team as far as pushing for a playoff berth or go deep in the playoffs? I don't know. Number two, Gabe Davis has drawn interest around the league. It's not just from the Giants, but interest from around the league. So he could, at this point in his career, say, all right, I'm going to take the best offer. And the Giants right now, they've got to open up some cap space if they want to make him a competitive offer. But as I mentioned, they've got other pressing priorities that they've got to address as well. So my point there with Gabe Davis is I don't necessarily think it's a lock for him to come to the Giants, despite whatever fondness he might have with Brian Dable and Joe Shane. I think Gabe Davis is going to have options. And unless he's willing to say, okay, yeah, I'm going to come here and I'm happy being a wide receiver number 4. And oh, by the way, Gabe Davis does not play special teams. So wouldn't you want a receiver who can contribute on special teams? So I just don't think that's a lock, folks. I really don't. Now, a couple of other positions. I mean, some people have said, well, what about defensive line? I'm getting a lot of questions about that. Defensive line, I think the Giants are going to be okay there. Now, there's nobody that has stepped up and been like a Leonard Williams per se, but I think they're going to be better than what they were last year in terms of the depth. Roy Robertson Harris, I think, is going to be an upgrade over Nacho, who, by the way, as you know, if you watched the show last week, when I did my 53-man roster predictions, I do think Nacho is going to somehow stick on the team. So I do think the Giants are going to be okay there. Obviously, they would like to get more out of Darius Alexander, who kind of had a quiet summer, kind of a nondescript summer. But remember, Darius Alexander missed all of the spring. So they are having that kid on a crash course to bring him up to speed to where maybe, who knows, maybe halfway in through the season, things will click for him, and suddenly he'll be the guy that makes puts an end to the worry about who's going to play next to Dexter Lawrence. All right, so those are my biggest needs for the Giants. Now, whether they agree, we'll have to see, obviously, but that's how I see it. And by the way, I'd be curious to see what you guys think. Put it in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube, if you agree with my list. And if not, tell me who you think or what order you would prioritize everything. All right, Giant fans, coming up next, we're going to talk about players on draft scholarships. That's right after this. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. The NFL season is right around the corner and you can feel the buzz. Fantasy football season is here. Everyone's researching, drafting, and building their championship squads. And if you haven't joined a league yet, now's the time, and it's all happening on Yahoo Fantasy. This year, I'm playing fantasy football on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first timer or a veteran creating your millionth league. With season kickoff on September 4th, now is the time to start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football, which offers so many fun ways to compete. You want more ways to play? Try the brand new Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine League mode, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated weekly until one team is left standing. Want to play instantly with friends? Try the new Draft with Friends mode. Prefer the classics? Get your crew together then and go head to head in a private league. Don't have a crew? No problem. Join a public league, the easiest way to play. The NFL season is almost here, so don't wait. Start your league right now. Draft now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. Again, that's yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And in this segment, we're going to talk about draft scholarships. All right. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm talking about guys who are drafted who kind of end up on scholarships because of their draft pedigree, even though their play suggests that the team should move on. There are two guys that obviously we need to talk about here. The first is Evan Neal. Now, Evan Neal, they started, the conversion of him from tackle to guard. And a lot of you have asked me, how has that gone? There's been moments where Evan Neal has been really good in terms of run blocking. But the pass pro, this was a question I had about him, to be honest with you, way back in the spring when this topic came up. And they talked about, converting him to guard. My biggest question with him was, if his footwork wasn't good enough at tackle, what made them think it would be good enough at guard? Now, you put Evan Neal in a phone booth and he is just fine. He will block out the sun. But when speed comes at him, now you get a little messy, if you will. It's like he guesses which way to go. And if he guesses wrong, you watch his footwork and it's very clumsy looking. So if anybody was thinking, okay, it was Evan Neal versus Greg Van Roten for the right guard spot, Van Roten won the job. Now, what do they do with Evan Neal? Well, Evan Neal was a draft pick, a number 1 draft pick, the second draft pick that Joe Schoen made as general manager. This is his 4th season. So if you're Joe Schoen, you could say, well, you know what? Let's continue to develop him. He was a first-round pick. He got a late start on the development. He played at Alabama. He shouldn't be that far off. So let's stick with him. But should they? I don't think so. All right. The reason why I say that is chances are the Giants are not going to sign him after this year. Chances are the Giants, or I should say, chances are that Neal isn't going to want to come back to the Giants after this year. Why continue to invest resources in developing him when you have other guys who are maybe a little bit better, a little bit further along that you can develop and work with and ultimately plug in at guard if you need to? I just, look, they gave Neal every opportunity, but I just don't see this working out. And my biggest fear is they're going to say, okay, you know what? He was a number 1 pick. We're going to keep him on scholarship. And they shouldn't. They absolutely should not in this instance, given where he's at in the contract, given the circumstances and what they have along the interior. But I have a feeling they're going to keep him. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong, but I have a feeling they're going to keep him. Now, the other guy who is kind of on a scholarship is receiver Jalen Hyatt. Now, this is a scenario where I think Jalen Hyatt is going to make this roster regardless. And here's why. Hyatt is 2 years in, and this is a draft pick that Shane traded up to get. I do not see him wanting to give up on Hyatt after just 2 years. All right. Now, if this were a 6th-round pick or a 7th-round pick, then I could see it. Not for a 3rd-round pick, and certainly not for a guy they traded up to get. I think they give him another year, right? And if he doesn't start to turn the corner, then all bets are off for the following year. So for those of you who are like, okay, get rid of Jalen Hyatt and bring in a Gabe Davis or whoever, pick your receiver that you might want. I don't think it's going to happen. But that said, I do think that Jalen Hyatt is kind of, holding on by his fingernails to a roster spot. He's got to improve. He knows it. The Giants know it. We're at a point now where it's now or never. And with the summer having concluded and preseason having concluded, I don't know what the plan is going to be to get him up to speed. He's just going to have to keep working at it. And I think he knows this too. He's going to have to keep working at it so that come, throughout the year, he shows them that, yes, I belong here, that I can be a part of this offense. All right. We'll see. As you know, I hope he does it. Good kid, works hard, but doesn't mean that he's a good football player at this point or an NFL football player at this point. Remember, he came in to the Giants and the NFL with a steeper learning curve, having not run the entire route tree at Kentucky. That is coming back, ladies and gentlemen, to hurt him because he has not run the entire route tree here in the NFL yet. Because right now, the Giants have kind of had him doing the specific routes that he has excelled in college. That ultimately has got to, change. Otherwise, you can't justify continuing to invest in him. And if that growth just isn't there, you move on. It's that simple. So, again, we'll see what they do. But obviously, Jalen Hyatt's got a lot of work still to do. All right, Giant fans, that is going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on Locked On Giants. And if you made us your first listen of the day, we appreciate that as well. NFL fantasy draft season is here. So for your next listen, go find Locked On Fantasy Football podcasts with your hosts, Vinnie Iyer and Michelle Magdziuk. Listen every day to prep for your fantasy draft and become the most informed manager so that you can take home your league's trophy this season. Find Locked On Fantasy Football on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Giant fans, I will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow, of course, Monday, we'll take Monday's show for Tuesday. And then, of course, Tuesday, roster cut down. We'll have reactions, the whole breakdown for you. So lots coming up here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Until then, have a great night, everybody.